this mes.
Ajá,
O en Facebook.
ya lo puse. Y bueno, sería el Facebook de Ayotzinapa Somos Todos. Hey,
Are you gonna be speaking to us?
nah, just our fancy camera work.
Awesome.
Mexican engineer. Creo que sí, estamos aquí en la presentación de México, la herida del mundo. Estamos probando el audio. No sé si haya personas en línea todavía, si nos pueden avisar si escuchan el audio.
¿Está bien que qué?
Vamos a hacer.
Don't worry about it. It's okay.
Are you sure?
Ya sé.
¿Y no nos vamos a juntar? No sé qué hacer para ir para allá. Hay que pedir chance.
¿No has pedido permiso?
Creo que es mi cuarto día de trabajo y ya voy a decir, oye, pues. ¿Qué podemos hacer? Estoy enfermo. Y otro vamos a hacer el activo 2000. Es a las 6.
Quería escribir una carta para entregarla al consulado, pero no. Vamos a hacerlo. Dice que ya no se escucha. ¿Qué pasa?
Yo lo estoy escuchando ahorita. Está un poco atrasado el tiempo, pero sí está. Sí hay audio.
Ok.
Bueno, es lo que escucho yo, no sé si.
Hola, hola. ¿Me escuchas?
Sí hay. Estoy escuchando yo ahorita.
Ah, ok.
Please listen up. People from Multicultural Center allow us to use this room, but the condition was they have classes right after, so we're supposed to keep the room as fixed as it was. Please, okay? So don't make any mess around. Second thing, we will be speaking in English, because there are people who don't speak Spanish, but of course, if you just want to ask something in Spanish, it's all right. Third, I will present a short video if we could, because we have problem with the audio now. But I brought some material, which is just, a handout with the name of the people who disappeared, and a main declaration from a series of universities that came together and organized something we call Global Forum of Foro Global, in solidarity with the people in. So please tell me the description of this. And I guess there are more than 50 people here, so please share. We don't have to speak about that. Nice. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, Doggy, then I will show you the video, then I will explain a little bit the four main hypotheses regarding this situation. So to have a sort of context, I also want to tell you that many professors from Latin American studies are here. So please show yourself. Brian, Calvin, Kirsten, Violeta, and also Spanish master students or magister students. So please feel free to ask, and this will be a conversation, right? So as you can see here, the most important thing is on the September 26th in the night, a group of students from Ayotzinapa, Guerrero, the state of Guerrero, they moved to Iguala to get some money to go to Mexico City to participate in the classical after 68 Tlatelolco commemoration. Tlatelolco, as you know, in 68 was in a big problem in Mexico, right? Because the authorities decided to kill approximately 350 students. This is official account that is taken as official precisely today. These students were participating in a sort of social protest against the government, the local government, but also the national government, because they, as really poor people, get to be professors of poor people. They are what we call in Mexico normalistas, which basically means that they go to a specific school, the Escuela Normalista de Iguala, to become professors of, young, countryside, rural, poor communities, right? But particularly in the last 2 years, the government of Mexico has been implementing a lot of policies that we call neoliberal policies, privatization of natural resources, right? And also reducing the financial support of many social initiatives, particularly education. They are taking away the money from education, right? So students obviously are protesting against that because the privatization of education will impact deeply in the community, right? But besides this frame, the national frame of a neoliberal policy, the mayor of that particular city talked to the police and told them that he didn't want any kind of mess around that night because they have a kind of celebration, right? And the police overreact to this, command and decide to, shoot on people, right? So there were 6 people killed that night. 3 of them coming out of the movement, and the other 3 were just pedestrians that were passing by without any sort of involvement with the movement, right? But then the police arrived there, and not just shot to kill, but also took the 43 remainder students, and those students are disappeared from that day to today. So we never found them again. Like 2 weeks ago, the state was producing a discourse saying that actually the students were killed, it was a narco traffic, and the students, unfortunately, were all incinerated and disappeared. But an Argentinian anthropologist team, you know, in the southern part, we also have dictatorship, so we have this kind of anthropologists, forensic teams that work identifying missing people and stuff like that, right? This team actually said that the reminders are not belonging to the students, so the students are still missing. But in the process of looking for the student, they also find a lot of massive graves, right? And they realize that actually this is too much. It is said that in 2013, there were 20,000 people disappeared in Mexico. I'm not talking just about the people killed in the last years of the so-called wars against narco-traffic, but I'm talking about people who just disappeared right in the last year, 2013. 20,000. You just figure that. 20,000, right? So the main hypothesis, since that we are already here, are four. The first one is the classical hypothesis that this is all due to corruption. So corruption is so bad, you know, Mexican people used to like money, they take long naps and drink a lot of tequila, and they are pretty easy and morally weak, so they are easy to corrupt. But this is a classical, we call it Oriental kind of explanation, right? The exotic explanation, right? First, because Mexico is not the most violent place. That's the more important thing. It's not all Mexico. Violence in Mexico is pretty localized in the south and in the border, because it's related to narco traffic and to reconfiguration of gangs, right? And power relations. But Guerrero is also west and probably the poorest state in Mexico, right? So it's not, this is not something that you might find in Mexico City, which has a different kind of crime. It's not something to find in, what's that, Puebla. This is pretty localized. Second, you know that last year, police in Brazil killed more than 10,000 people, just police. So if you make a comparison in terms of number, Mexico is not at all the most violent place. And it's not because of corruption, right? Also, you know that we've been discussing a long time about the femicides. You familiar with that word? The systematic killing of women in Mexico? Due to the, you know, to the narco traffic and the maquilas in the north. Well, you know that the femicide number, the number of victims of femicides is bigger in Central America than in Mexico. It's getting a really big problem. It's becoming a really big problem in Honduras. You know, today, for example, the Miss Honduras, who was participating in this beauty contest, was found dead, right? So Honduras, Guatemala are even more violent than Mexico. So we have this misrepresentation of Mexico as a, you know, very folklorical place, very exotic place where everyone is carrying a weapon and everybody is in danger and you might be killed perfectly, which is not true. Which is not true, and it's not everywhere in Mexico the same kind of violence, and this violence got particular reasons. So we need to know what are them. Second hypothesis, of course, is, you know, narco traffic. So every time you speak about narco traffic in Mexico, it seems that narco traffic is already taken all the countries. So narco traffic is the main problem we have, and nothing could be done in Mexico because narco traffic is so powerful, and everything is related to narco traffic, but it's not true. The problem with this kind of argument is the following. Every time you speak about narco traffic, you are justifying more security. And more security implies more money going to private corporations that provide security and to transnational, mostly then of course American companies that produce weapons and security. So security itself is already an issue, right? It's not the answer to the problem, but it's creating itself the problem. So every time when people speak about narco traffic, you have to be really careful regarding that, because in the name of the war against narco traffic, more than 200,000 people were killed in the last 7 years in Mexico. You see? 200,000. That's correct? 200,000. That's what I want to say. 200,000? Good. So, and the other hypothesis is, of course, police. Right? Police. Police is becoming an autonomous corporation. Right? It seems that it's not anymore regulated by the classical state, by the classical constitution and the classical social contract. So we've been confronting this situation with police going over the limit in many places. Actually, you remember what happened here in Missouri, what was it, 2 months ago? What was the name of the town? Jefferson, right? Missouri. So, and I already told you about the police killing more than 10,000 people in the last years in Brazil, right? In fact, in Brazil, we have probably the most aggressive, violent police in the whole region, right? And there is a couple of movies, Chop the Lid, which shows that how police actually work as a corporation, not in correcting crime, but in devastating, killing, eradicating criminals. Now, the whole problem is, of course, what do you understand by criminal? What would be a criminal? What is a criminal, right? And this is pretty much related with urbanization, with moving people out of the city, and with the production of cheap work, labor, for new transnational corporations. So police has been under analysis in the last 10 years in Latin America, not just in Latin America, because also another important thing to consider is the privatization of police and the privatization of the army in general in the last 20 years. So we have now a lot of corporations, private interest corporations, that produce security and produce personnel of security. You see? We used to call that mercenaries. We don't call them anymore mercenaries. We just call them personnel, right? But this personnel, they don't respond to the state and the social contract, to civil society, or to democracy. They respond to the interests of corporations, right? So private police and private corporation of security are becoming really, really important, and are becoming really, really crucial because they also have the right to use the weapons. They have the right to kill in a preemptive situation. And you know what preemptive has meant in the last 10 years in America, right? So here in this you have a short narrative of what happened. The idea of this conversation, hopefully it's going to be a conversation, the idea is not to blame anyone. I'm not happy with the idea that everything happening in Mexico is due to the state, or is due to the police, or is due to the Mexican character, or tequila, or too many nuts. And also not happy with the idea that everything taking place in Mexico is to blame American people intervention and imperialism. That's not enough. We need to understand what is going on actually in Latin America and in Mexico. So here you have a narrative, that's it. And then you have also the name of the 43 people that were kidnapped that time. And next to the name, you have in Spanish and in English, the consignas that people create in order to keep alive their memories, right? So I just want to show you a video or a couple of videos, and then we might have a conversation.
Eight years ago, the president of Mexico, facing a highly contested election, decided to declare a war on drugs. To do this, he called the military to the streets. The results were that Mexico went from having 9,900 murders per year in 2005 to 23,000 in 2013. On December 2012, Enrique Peña Nieto from the PRI, the Institutional Revolutionary Party, became president of Mexico. The PRI was in power from the 1920s until 2000 and had many accusations of disappearance and violence against students. Enrique Peña Nieto's first action as president was to create alliances with Congress to push for reforms, most of them related to the economy. He invested heavily in cleaning Mexico's image abroad, running various editorials in world newspapers, and pushed security to a less prominent place than his predecessor. Yet, the violence continued. Not because you ignore a problem, it means it goes away. In 2013 alone, 23,000 people were killed. 1 out of 3 homes reported to have been subject to a crime, and even the government accepts that more than 90% of crimes are never resolved. On September 26th, a group of students was protesting on Iguala, the third largest city in Mexico's poorest state, Guerrero. The municipal government and the state government both belong to the opposition leftist party, PRD, Party of the Democratic Revolution. The local police came in, killed 6 students, and arrested the other 43. There is no record of the students in any jail. In the weeks that followed, 10 mass graves were discovered around Iguala. The mayor of the town and his wife ran away after a local newspaper showed the mayor's brother-in-law was a drug dealer. He was finally found on the 4th of November, hiding in Mexico City. While this crisis was going on, the president of Mexico decided to go on tour to China and Australia, as they are important business partners. But it has been more than a month, and he has yet to visit Iguala, less than 5 hours drive from Mexico City. On November 7th, Mexico's Attorney General gave a press conference where he announced that according to some of those interrogated who showed signs of torture, they believed the students had been killed and burned. The parents refused to accept this information until reliable DNA sources are presented. When he thought the microphone was off, he told his aide to end the questions as he was tired. Ya me cansé. We stand here today saying we are also tired of a government that cares more about macroeconomic deals than the security of its people, tired of corruption, tired of fighting a war on drugs that will only be solved when demand in the United States decreases, tired of unsolvable crimes. The state has a responsibility to protect its population. We ask you to do 3 things. Write to your local Mexican embassy or consulate to demand justice. Attend local events in your area to create awareness. Spread the word. Mexican politicians cannot hide if the world is watching them.
A mi hermanito enseñé, jugando en aquel patio en la escuela, a mi hermanito enseñé. Como no había para el viaje, me puse yo a trabajar. Hice mi examen de entrada con ansias, contento de ir a estudiar. Hice mi examen de entrada con ansias a esa escuela rural. El 26 de septiembre sucedió todo lo peor. Fuimos todos agredidos con armas por el gobierno opresor, tirando a darnos directo a mansalva. Mi hermanito cayó. Corrimos todos a un lado para podernos salvar. Los policías en cambio llegaban dispuestos a asesinar.
Yes, last one.
Estoy tirado en el suelo. Se nota dónde enterraron el cuchillo y me cortaron la cara. Se me ven los dientes. En vez de rostro hay carne expuesta y te atormentan tus huecos donde deberían de estar mis ojos.
Mis compañeros me estuvieron buscando y me encontraron convertido en símbolo. Quisieron arrebatarme de los míos, robarles la memoria para matarme, para borrarme y desaparecerme ahora sí y para siempre. Quisieron convertirme en su crimen, su amenaza.
sangre y los huesos en que me dejaron y ver la mirada fija de quien una vez fui, estudiante, normalista, hermano.
No me olvides, porque si me olvidas, ellos ganan. Si me confundes con eso que dejaron en el suelo, solo seré un torturado más, y eso mismo quieren ellos. Ellos que me esperaron, que me buscaron, que me persiguieron y me ultrajaron para que dejara de ser humano, pero que no pudieron. Ellos que sirven a la muerte y aplastan la inocencia y la confianza del pueblo pobre para que se calle, para que aguante, para que se deje matar, pero que no pudieron.
Porque el rostro que se llevaban es mío, pero la carne que dejaron es de todos. Y estos huesos también son tuyos, y estos ojos también te faltan. Mi gente me llora, y mi pueblo hoy se esconde, pero cuando salga a reconquistar las calles no podrá, por más que intente, ya no podrá ser un pueblo inocente. No será un pueblo que confía. Será fuego, luz, estruendo y viento. Será el ejército redentor, el huracán que arrastra los escombros para que venga el futuro. Será la mortalada y justiciera que sostiene la razón y empuña despiadadas las armas para imponerla. El pueblo será el implacable regreso de la justicia y de la historia.
I just forgot to put the English subtitles, so Spanish is a very conventional. Shouldn't be a problem for you guys. Okay, so the idea will be to have a conversation. So, any question, any comment, reaction?
I'm not trying to be a bad guy, but well, this goes maybe to you, Dr. Ryan and Dr. Sloan. You guys might know it better than I do, but well, I talked about this with Dr. Villalobos in his class. And I'm not a radical, I'm not a Marxist or nothing, but I told Dr. Villalobos one day in class, well, this is my solution. Why can't Mexico just why can't we have like another Pancho Villa and fight back? Because the way I see it, Dr. Ryan, the way I see it, the government's not going to change. The United Nations doesn't help out. I mean, we got to fight. I mean, Mexico has to fight back. That's what I was just asking. Why can't there be another Pancho Villa and create another revolution? Or you guys know maybe why?
Alberto, would you see that revolution fighting the narco-traffickers and the government? Or you see the narco-traffickers and the government as one and the same?
I kind of see them the same, but what's the difference? You know what I'm saying?
I mean, I think Sergio really hit it on the head when he said that that it's pretty kind of fruitless, if not counterproductive, to look for unicausal explanations. This is so extraordinarily complex. So fight against, who is Pancho Villa punto dos, you know, or 2.0? Who is he fighting? Who is he attacking? With what aim? With what end? What's the end point that we're trying to get to?
See, I don't know. That's why I say too, Dr. Stone, because I'm not familiar with my whole Mexican history either. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, who is he fighting? The government and the bad people. I'm sorry, I don't know the terminology here. But that's what I was thinking. Why can't we have like another this excuse my language, this badass is gonna lead Mexico and rise the people up and fight back. That's kind of what I was saying.
Just one more observation, I think, that it's interesting that you use that analogy because there's this sort of implicit assumption that you hear quite a bit inside and outside of Mexico that there needs to be a savior, that there has to be a man on horseback, and that, to a certain degree, from my perspective, kind of does a couple of things. It sort of disempowers the people,
Which is the most important thing, right?
Says that they are incapable of agency and not able to act on their own. And second of all, in a sort of more, I don't know, insidious way, it allows people off the hook. It says, well, there's no savior, so we don't need to do anything. And that's, to my mind, the biggest danger, is complicity, is people getting so angry and frustrated and feeling so hopeless that they just say, I can't deal with it anymore, and just withdraw. And I'd be curious to see what my colleagues or anybody else think about this idea that's floating around that maybe we hit a tipping point. that pushes things, you know, over the edge and activates civil society in a way that, again, to my mind, is going to be the key to any meaningful wholesale reform of the system that would kind of mitigate the violence that we're seeing.
I think Dr. Ryan's right. I mean, we have some great examples. They haven't had, I mean, the Arab Spring, or what happened in Tunisia to spark that off. Now we know that things aren't so great in Egypt right now, but that movement's still sustained. People are still fighting. You know, in Mexicans, I mean, gosh, I mean, so many people I'm Facebook friends with that are in Mexico. It's like, there's a sustained movement going on right now. If they can just continue it and make it more nationwide and also bring people in from the different classes, you know, it just can't be a student movement or a movement of the youth, also include the other generations.
I guess one of the things we learned from the failure of many radical projects in the 20th century is that the classical notion of revolution with the, you know, heroes and the radical party radically failed. It became something else. And I actually totally agree with Ryan and Kevin. The whole point is civil society, or social movement, as we call it also in Latin America, right? And the activism of social movement and civil society is always the key because it implies the people, participation, institutionalization of new legislation that favor the people. There is no way out of this. Because the other will be messianism, to bring somebody out of the earth to save the people, but people have to make that observation. And they actually fighting every day. It's not true that the people is just passive, waiting for, you know, a solution, or just demanding from the state a better solution. In Mexico, social activism is pretty important. It's been always important. That's exactly why we have so many incidents, so many violence, because social movements are always active. You remember the Zapatist movement in the beginning of the 90s? It's not dead. It's still there. They have the escuelita, they are, you know, teaching students, they reproduce themselves. There is a sort of long time memory in social movement. And yes, we are waiting for this reactivation. You shouldn't forget that the last 30 years of the 20th century, Latin America was under civil wars and dictatorships. And the main task of dictatorship and civil war was the deactivation of social participation. But now we again are confronting a limit situation, and it seems that many people is getting together. You remember before the World Cup, Brazilian favelas, shantytowns, poor neighborhood, all the kids activated again and protesting again, you know. And it's the same thing is going on against the energetic policy that are devastating the Amazon, right, today. And if you move to Chile, you will have exactly the same kind of issue with the Mapuches and with the students, because the students are also fighting back the neoliberal reform of education that implies basically privatization, right? Privatization, that means basically that you don't have access to education because you have to be in debt for the rest of your life, which seems to be similar to what is going on here, right? And then as you move to Bolivia, you have a strong indigenous movement that is not exactly equivalent to the state. Sometimes it's more radical than the state, and it's complaining about how the state is making decisions regarding natural resources that goes against the communities, and so on and so forth. So yes, to me it's not finding a new Pancho Villa or a new Che Guevara, even though I like those guys. But we shouldn't forget that this is a reconstruction, a mythification of social processes. Social processes are always more complex, and it's not just one guy, many people. That's what I said, I don't know.
I'd like to add something as well. And there has been a lot of Pancho Villas who have come after him. And the state of Guerrero has produced a lot of Pancho Villas. Students who graduated from those schools, from the normales, they were normalistas. Lucio Cabañas, Genaro Vázquez, Florencio Medrano. These were people who, like Pancho Villa, took up arms against the government because they saw the conditions that their students were living in, because they know what conditions people in their parts of the country are growing up in, because they lived through those conditions. But as Professor Villalobos said, as well as the people also need to mobilize. Because what is Pancho Villa without the people? Right? He's nothing. What is Emiliano Zapata without the people? just people preaching revolution, but not taking action in revolution. And the current movement right now with the normalistas and Yo Soy 132, that brings in like a breath of hope of what can happen in Mexico. And I think what threatens the state, why the state feels threatened with the normalistas is because of that history of them knowing what it's like to live and growing up in poverty and bad conditions. The government knows that exactly, and that's why they're taking actions like this, is to suppress the normalistas and the potential that they have. I mean, it's a great history. Read about those folks. And many of them, like I said, came from the state of Guerrero, Morelos, Michoacán, and Oaxaca.
Could either of you explain exactly what a normalista is or what the ideology behind that is?
It's no ideology though, it's just, normalista is a person who decides to be a teacher.
Okay.
So they go to a specific rural sort of technical school to become prepared to be professor of communities, right? Missing something here? That's basically a normalista. Now, it's no ideology, it's not that they got to go to Cuba or to Marxist-Leninist kind of formation, no. Through the experience, through the everyday life experience they got, watching around, seeing people, seeing the poorest condition of the communities and so on, they became aware of what is the problem. So it's not an ideological indoctrination, but rather is the conclusion of an experience, right? And because of that experience is so obvious, the state finding the normalistas a really symptomatic problem of social movement and repress normalistas. Normalistas and also students in Mexico have been in the 20th century very active. So there's been many incidents. It's not just Tlatelolco and now Guerrero, Iguala. It's been always situation like this. That's a normalista.
Right. I mean, there's a long history of militants, you know, a militant kind of activism that was associated in particular with Ayotzinapa, but also with other normal schools. I guess if you're looking for an equivalent, I would say teachers' college. You know, there's, like you say, you put it well, it's a technical school designed to train folks to teach primarily in the rural, underserved areas. And they're notorious for being just terribly underfunded and understaffed. And it's kind of perpetuates this cycle of
Poor people
lack of
teaching poor people.
education
How to be
and
poor people.
poverty and marginalization.
So that's important because, you know, after the Mexican Revolution that was, you know, starting by the 1910, 1911 till the 1920s, the PRI, which is the Revolutionary Party, right? Institutional Revolutionary Party, which is an oxymoron, of course, stayed in power till 2000, right? And that produced a very specific situation in Mexico because in general in Latin America through the 20th century we have the Cold War kind of frame in which you have the liberal, right, democratic, pro-imperialist sector and you have the pro-Soviet, pro-Cuban, revolutionary left, the right and the left. But what happened in Mexico is the PRI, the so-called party of the revolution, was in power. So it wasn't that easy. You know, on one hand you have the right, the liberal, you know, PAN, which is the last name of a very traditional conservative history in Mexico. But then on the left, you have an institutional party that is also responsible for many, many mistakes and corruption. As you know, any party that stays in power for more than 70 years is suspicious of something, right?
Oh, yeah.
So what happens here? We have social movements that don't fix necessarily, don't identify necessarily with the left or the right. And that's exactly the problem. The normalistas are not ideologically on the left in that sense. But they, of course, in a different notion of the left, that is not even necessary. In a different notion of radical democracy, you might identify that, right? But not the traditional left. The Communist Party in Mexico was an official party. It was a Communist Party that was justifying what happened in Tlatelolco. So it's complicated, you see? Yes.
I was just thinking and wondering, you know, with Dr. Ryan's comment about this being a is it going to be a moment for coalition building? Because I think if people are particularized and are isolated in their protest and to change the tide of what's going on. The other thing is the freedom of the press. I think the press is hugely important. We see journalists being killed along the border all the time for writing about the narco trafficking and the violence, the femicides. And so I think that, you know, if the press can be empowered and free to speak and to build coalitions with people, that's been the job that
Totally. Be careful with any comment about the press because we had a. No, that's quite true though. I mean, I sort of understand the idea of coming to a limit situation right now because indeed, we don't have the working class as the main character during the revolution, right? The working class went through many transformations, historical transformations. That's no one homogeneous subject as in classical Marxism. But today we're experiencing a limit situation because, you know, the deforestation of the Amazon is implying also a problem for the indigenous communities, for the countryside communities, and at the same time, what you call environmental issue. So these coalitions you are calling are pretty much natural, already given somehow, because we're experiencing a limit situation. Of course, it doesn't mean that you have to sit in your chair and wait for, you know, social processes. No, but indeed, the coalition seems to be the only alternative, or social movement, by the way. Harry, please.
In English, finally. Okay, so.
You mean in English? I'm speaking English, finally?
No, I get to.
Okay.
So this may be a very loaded question, but I grew up in the U.S. and I feel like maybe I just haven't seen it enough, because I'm from a class of privilege, I suppose. But how come in Mexico, 20,000 some people have died, right, in the past however many years? 8 years?
1 year.
Oh, sorry. 1 year.
Add a
Okay.
0 onto that, and you got 8 years.
Okay, 8 years. So how come, I mean, that happens, right? I mean, students get gunned down, there are these mass graves. But I feel like that's just something that wouldn't happen in my hometown. That's something that wouldn't happen. I imagine, like, one student, you know, the Trayvon Martin case got huge national public attention, and that was one person. And I'm just wondering, I don't even know if it's possible to describe or to explain that, but why can that happen in Mexico, but not here?
Well, it's already happening here. I mean, the end of the watch. That's what we do.
Yeah.
It's already happening here. I mean, we don't see it because somehow we're not used to see beyond ourselves, but it's been happening all the time. We have a splitting in the north and the south. We have the history of slavery. We have the history of immigration policies that are pretty bad against immigrants. We have exploitation that is getting to, you know, radical levels, problem with the minimum wage. We are losing social policies. There's a big discussion about social security. The state's not putting a lot of money in education. We went through Reagan, directly to the war against terror and so on. So it's happening here.
So you think maybe it just takes a more violent form in Mexico with just, you know, slaughtering students or burning bodies?
It's a good problem because I told you, right, Mexico is not at all the most violent country. Not at all. Right? I already told you that in Honduras, the number of women killed just because they are women is even bigger than what happened in the 90s in Ciudad Juarez, right? But somehow the media, in general, produce a specific image of Mexico, right? It's a classical history of these American guys that go to Tijuana, right, to have fun in the weekend, and then get into Tijuana, you know, in front of San Diego, and suddenly they find Egyptian pyramids, and camels, and cactuses, and all the things you might buy with money. I've never been pyramids in the north of Mexico, neither camels or cactuses of the kind they were selling there. So this is a production of the other. It's also a political strategy. The production of Mexico as a very confusing place where you might die. Don't get involved, don't participate. Narco-traffic, corruption, the state. No, it's not like that. Of course, there are many things going on, but there's also social activism, social organization, good people, and believe me guys, really good food. Please, Anna.
Well, I think the question, I've been reading about this cartels are not only dealing right now with getting drugs and selling drugs, they have diversified their activities, and one of the things that they're doing is trying to infiltrate local governments. And they're doing this, they have coalitions with governors and policemen in Mexico. So one of the main strategies that we could follow is really difficult. The key is in dismantling these associations, because we know that politicians who do not comply are killed as well. Dealers, and we know that the press, who try to write about what's going on are also murdered or extorted. So we need to draw the attention there to that very complex problem, because that's one of the origins. The drug cartel, the Guerrero Unidos, who killed these students, they knew that they could get away with it because these things happen in a very, frequent basis.
It's been said that there is no politician in Mexico that has been elected without contribution from narco traffickers.
Yes.
There has been no one. Like, imagine that, right?
So that's one of the main issues to address.
Yeah, they call it the second state, actually, right? I mean, the first state is the obvious state of affairs. The institutional state is the institution of the state. But the second state is all the informalities surrounding the state business. And it's already, I mean, everybody knows that the money that the second state, the informal activity produce, is twice the money that the state produces in regular business. So yes.
Yeah. Kind of building off what she said, I think part of the problem is that when we talk about the drug organization, we always talk about cartels. And they are cartels, but they're kind of moving past that to being corporations that have the ability to lobby, that have the ability to influence. And in the United States, we talk about, all the lobbying that goes in Washington, D.C. and the problems that it causes. But I think that transitions to Mexico, and that these drug cartels, these drug corporations have the ability to lobby people high up in the government. Not just your local governors, not just your local policemen, but people that make decisions that impact millions of people, and then they go on their own, and they can circumnavigate all the laws and the policemen, but their direct impact on that is heavy, but their impact on the decision making and their impact on squashing these social movements isn't just, we can be violent, it's, we can influence the government.
There's been a professionalization of the narco groups. They became professional. It's not the classical representation of the jefe, right? It is a nasty guy with a lot of money that complain, that have kids around, ladies and people working for him. Very professional. They put money in banks. They buy real estates. They launder the money to the resorts they are building in the coast. Yeah, they actually support education processes because they have fellowships and stuff, and they of course put a lot of money in politics. So it's a very interesting point because narco trafficking is not a classical representation of the bad guy, the bad criminal, but it's a professionalization process. That's along the way of the very modernization of capitalist accumulation in Mexico. It's interesting.
Right, and they're selling timber, they're shipping oil to China, it's the last couple observations are exactly.
They also put money in pharmaceutical companies. No, totally. Colombia was the key place in the 80s, right? Medellin and in general Colombia was the dirty place to see this narcotraffic problem. The difference between Colombia and Mexican cartels is precisely this process of professionalization. And that the official history called it globalization, by the way. This is pretty much.
So I'm from Mexico. I'm from Sinaloa, which is a really big, it's a state full of narcocultura, which is culture. When you mention that question, as a student, I can reflect, like, how would a student from the U.S. look at it now being here in the U.S.? Why we accept this in Mexico with all this killing is because there's narcocultura, which means it's part of our culture. I remember growing up, and I remember looking at the side of the road, and you can see like bodies without their heads and then a blanket thrown in the highway, and that's part of our culture. So it no longer becomes scared, or it no longer becomes shocked anymore. You can pick up the newspaper and so many people being killed constantly. My best friends, we normally would see them in high school, they would die New Year's Eve because they're somehow related to it. Like, how it works is like, you are my best friend, we both go to school, but maybe your dad is in this stupid narco. Your dad is with these. So what they do is they fight between each other, so they're gonna kill him for some reason because he's his son. But I can be with you, just be your friend. But because I was with you in the wrong time, the wrong moment, there's a lot of loose bullets, I get killed too. So it's part of the culture. Why is it not shocking for us? Because we see it every day. And why is it shocking?
And that probably
here?
is one of the mistakes, right? I mean, I'm not saying that there's no the Santa Muerte cult. Everybody knows that it's become. This is what happened in Colombia. Violence was so common that they create a special kind of profession, and they call it violentologist. And the media showed too many crimes that everybody was kind of used to it, right?
Yeah,
But that's not the only culture in Mexico, right?
No, not at all. But for example, they also provide the jobs. So why do people like me or okay with it, being with fear all the time? Because the narco culture, they have all this money, but they also provide jobs. They also provide, they fix the roads, they fix this, they fix that. So at the same time, like that's, like it's a disgusting shit, and you're living in shit, and you get used to it because that's how you eat, and that's, so why is it shocking here and there? Because there's culture involved with that, and not every state is like this. I lived in other places in Mexico, and it's not like this. I didn't see Sinaloa especially, where we have Chapo Guzman, we have the most,
Right.
it's talked as if he's my neighbor. It is not a taboo anymore.
I remember in Medellin when, what was the name of the guy? Pablo Escobar gave big houses to poor people. Everybody loved him precisely because he got the money to, you know. But you can't realize that it was poor people because beside the big houses, they didn't have money to put curtains, so they put any other kind of bed covers and stuff like that. You see? The question will be, is narcoculture, let's call it like that, right, a supplement to the failure of the state?
Yeah.
Right? It seems to be a supplement of the failure of the state. Or is narcoculture just part of the state? I mean, is the state what used to be, or is the state itself what changed in a way that worked through this kind of narcoculture? Right? The question is the state, basically.
Yeah, don't you think the state is complicit in that? Because, I mean, they're afraid to voice or throw attention on or suppress narcocultura to the extent that they would lose their business, they would lose their international business. This is all kind of, rooted in sort of neoliberal agendas and, maybe not even in a conscious way, but it's a result of this.
Yep.
So,
That's exactly what I said, that the thesis or the hypothesis of corruption is not good enough. It's not just a few, bad apples around and making the problem. It's a systemic evolving of the state. The nature of the state changed dramatically. So it's not just few authorities, that are getting money. It's the very way in which the state worked through society.
So how could it be possible to have a state in a globalized world that isn't beholden to capital, whether it be in the U.S., defense contractors, corporations that are exploiting people, or in Mexico, narco money that comes from here, or corporate money that determines who has a job. And like, for instance, Mexico has all these labor laws to protect the workers, but their IMF loan says they can't do it. So workers are not protected. They don't enforce those laws.
Crucial question, isn't it? How we can have a state that protects people when we have this powerful articulation of capital in a transnational way? Because it seems that even the most radical leftist state failed to the compares of capitalism, right? The so-called socialism of the 20th century was somehow a central capitalism. So how we can do that? That's the main question, right? I mean, how we can move social activism, because social activism by itself is not enough. The democratic irruption of people on the street is not enough. We need to go to it seems to me, of course, I'm just speculating here, right? But it seems to me that the only alternative will be a process of institutionalization. That's the name for that has been always republicanism, right? But yes, we are accepting the same question today. I mean, I'm not really very optimistic about that, even though I know that people is, moving and trying to do things, fighting back.
So you don't want to test your knowledge of Colombian history. What did Colombia do? a lot safer to travel and live in Colombia than it is.
It's not much what Colombia did, but did a lot of things though,
No,
huh?
I mean, I know there's a lot, I mean, I know the FARC is weaker, but I'm talking about like the drug cartels. And
Well, it was a geopolitical transformation of the drug traffic. Basically, in the late 80s and the 90s, most of the people trained to be paramilitaries in the Central American insurrectional processes.
Sure.
With the, the CIA money and stuff like that. There's a Kerry reports, by the way, online, right? John Kerry's report, which is famous about that. So many of these personnel that were military trained became somehow unemployed because the Central American process stopped by the mid-90s. Remember?
Right.
The peace accord in Central America. So these people without employment and very highly trained became somehow part of the narco-traffic groups. And the most important here is the Zetas, right? The Zetas, with a very high military training and with the ability to organize themselves. And then also, through the globalization process and the free market agreement in the 94-95, that make all the circuit and the highways and the border strategic. So somehow, the production is still pretty high in Colombia and Bolivia,
Yeah.
but the articulation, the most sensitive place is the border and the south of Mexico, Guerrero.
Right.
Because through Guerrero, you go directly to the border. That's the point.
Yeah.
And also because in Mexico in the 90s, a new branch of, how you call it, heroin. A new branch of heroin is being discovered, and in Guerrero in particular, is a place in which you produce this new branch, which is pretty addictive, and I hesitate to say pretty good, but they say it's pretty good. I don't really want to say it's pretty good. I just don't have enough English to avoid that. High quality, there you go. It's a professional tapping here. All right.
So Sergio, what can an ordinary American student, faculty member,
Faculty and students need to be good in what they do.
what can we do?
We every day somehow fight back power, right? The practice of being a good student, the practice of being a good professor, the practice of paying attention, reading, learning the language, understanding the culture, fight back the mass media, melodramatic representation of the other, fight back the ossification process, right? Trying to understand the complexity of processes. That's the very first. But also, we also have a lot of social organizations in Northwest Arkansas, right? So you guys are organizing something for tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow, the Mexican consulate is coming up to Springdale tomorrow. They've actually been here for a couple of days. But we said tomorrow is actually the general strike that's happening in Mexico. So Magali is also helping this, and other friends as well who are helping organize this. But tomorrow, the Mexican consulate is still going to be here in Springdale. I can pull up the address right now in order. If possible, I can also put up the flyer that we've made up on the screen. But it's tomorrow at 5 p.m. And it's going to be in Springdale. And it's going to be a group of us who are preparing a letter. We already made signs and made banners to express our outrage of what's going on in Mexico right now to the Mexican consulate. There are representatives of the Mexican government, so we want to deliver our message loud and clear, that we do not agree with the politics that are going on, with the violence that's going on, state-sponsored violence. So we're going to do that, and we would like to invite everybody who's here to join us. And like I said, it's in support of the 43 students who disappeared and who are probably tortured. But yeah, we would like to extend that invitation. So I guess that's part of an answer to your question about what we can do here locally as professors and students. And it's only like a 20-minute ride, and weather is supposed to cooperate with us, hopefully, but you never know what's happening. But if it's really cold, then we'll probably provide some coffee and some hot chocolate to warm us.
And how can we get information on where to go?
There's a Facebook event. I can, or towards the end of the presentation, can we pull up the flyer, and that'll have the address, the time, and we're asking people to dress in black, because we are mourning students, but we're also still in struggle. So wear black and bring candles as well. It's going to be like a visual as well, but also we're planning it towards the end of the day when the consulate, the Mexican consulate staff is leaving the place. That way we can catch them as they're leaving and deliver that message.
I think it's important to mention for people that don't know Mexican history that tomorrow is also the anniversary of the beginning of the revolution.
Yeah.
Yes, that's why we are, well, this is gonna be global. As the consequence of the government, all Mexicans spread out of the world. So now we have movements in Europe, movements here in the United States supporting Mexico. So tomorrow, well, all this week has been a lot of strikes. And tomorrow in Chicago, Vegas, California, Seattle, here in Arkansas, in Bolivia, Mexico, a lot of states in Mexico and Europe are going to be doing this to support what's going on now in Ayotzinapa. So you're all invited to come.
We also have this Ayotzinapa Somos Todos, which is a WordPress site. We have many activities, it's the same route, and we coordinate everything from there. And it's open, I mean, it's totally free and open. So any information you need from homework or extra credit, but also if you really want to participate in this, it's open. We have the videos here. Every activity that is been taking place in the last days is there. And tomorrow it's supposed to be between 16 and 20. So we already did the same activities in Berkeley, in Princeton, in Chicago, and in Austin, and of course in Fayetteville.
A lot of universities.
And there will be many other activities in the next days. And one of the most important things is even though globalization produces different kind of violence in a global scenario, probably the only good things regarding this is now justice becomes also global. It's a global issue. So it's not something that is going on over there. It's something that is taking place everywhere. Whether you like it or not, you are already inside this process. That's the point.
And I have the address if folks want to write it down as well. It's 1751 North 56th Street. And the place where it's taking place is, it has a Spanish name, Centro Cristiano Hispano.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, that's where the Mexican consulate's in. We're not protesting the church. We're protesting the Mexican consulate.
So it's again?
1751 North 56th Street.
It's going to be 4:30. Yes.
Come on, ask me.
Oh yeah, 4:30, sorry.
Another question. Go ahead.
So, saying like we do stuff locally, correct? To show support for this protest. Historically, what other nations in the past that have had a similar situation like this, whether it be like massacres or narco traffic or anything of the sort, what historically, what have they done in order to alleviate this? And also, as you would put it, would it be like a metamorphosis of like, I mean, with like inside the corporation, like inside the second state per se?
Yeah. It's difficult because precisely because of that metamorphosis that sociologists and political scientists call globalization. But you remember what happened in Tunisia and then in Egypt and then in a bunch of countries around there? So we don't know exactly how media and social activism is working today. Many people is optimistic about this kind of networking processes. You know, how they coordinate in Tunisia and in Egypt, you know, when they took the Tahrir square, they were just coordinating through Facebook, believe it or not. And then also the 132 movement, Yo Soy 132 against, you know, the reproduction of the bureaucracy in Mexico, was coordinated basically through the same kind of social media. So I'm not a very optimistic person regarding technology and these things, but I believe there is always a room to fight back. And through social media, you can coordinate things. And no, please, do not confuse me with a Facebook activist. Nothing like that. But yes, I believe that information is crucial and this social networking is important.
I do think it's very important to just talk as much as we can about it on Facebook, Twitter, among ourselves and among people, you know. because the federal government is already trying to cover it up and it's saying, no, that country's not on fire, this is not important. And we cannot, I mean, even if just talking about it helps and contributes, we should just keep on doing.
Yeah, I believe as a professor we have to address this with professionalism and responsibility, no blaming easily, no one, but at the same time open up the discussion because that's part of the university life. And to be a student also is to get involved in the discussion because the discussion is always the same, justice. It's always the same. So yeah.
And to kind of take off on the earlier statement about capital, I think in a kind of a perverse way, it's actually international capital that might provoke meaningful change in the sense that it's pretty clear that the political class in Mexico up to this point has been largely immune to pressure from below. What it's very sensitive to, and especially Peña Nieto, is pressure from international capital. And, I think on a suggestion, you talk about it, you discuss this, you post things on social media. It may seem frivolous sometimes, but in the long run, it creates, I think, a certain dynamic discussion where that eventually percolates up to the people who are investing in Mexico. And that's what, frankly, scares the bejeebers out of people like Peña Nieto, not crowds in the street or demonstrating students. It's when Walmart decides they're not going to build that new plant because things are too unstable. So it's a kind of on the one, it's a double-edged sword. Capital is clearly responsible for gutting the state and leaving the vacuum that you described, where narcos have to move in to build roads. But on the same, by the same token, I think it provides a point of leverage that might induce change.
We have to be active citizens. Active citizens. Even writing to your representative is a political act.
My question is for Dr. Ryan and international capital. What do you think about, we're talking about, I don't want to turn this like a populist uprising, but it's a populist movement in Mexico right now, where in the United States, their reaction to a populist movement that kept on growing in Mexico because of the large number of Mexican heritage people that live in the United States, that if it created instability, that could be bad for the United States, and they would want to kind of keep things as they are simply because, you really don't know what would come. And with the border being as it is, things are in chaos as it is for a lot of America.
Just to be clear, you're saying that, for example,
just the pressure
large capital in the United States or investors in Europe or elsewhere
to keep things as they are because they don't want it.
Yes and no. I mean, yes, as so long as it appears that the status quo is tenable. Once it becomes clear that the status quo, doing business the way that they've done business for the last decade, is not tenable, is not sustainable, and that continuing to do what they've been doing is going to produce a worse crisis, a deepening crisis, and potential for violence down the line, then I think you get the response. Then that cost-benefit analysis that these multinationals engage in starts to tilt in favor of reform. When and whether we get to that point, it's impossible to say, but I think that's going to be a kind of a crucial factor in the decision-making process in the political class in Mexico. It's again in a kind of an odd way. I think it's we may be pinning our hopes on people that aren't necessarily friends of reform, but in an indirect way may be the ultimate kind of agents of it, wittingly or unwittingly.
Go ahead.
I think there's a potential, so right now, it's not a necessarily stable environment. You're saying that there's potential for outside capital to see it as a growing instability with how the system is working right now. But if the government attempts to change the system, can there be pushback from narco trafficking, and they could destabilize it even more, and kind of have a reverse effect for the same effect, I guess, that you're saying? Influencing investment in Mexico, so that could be incentive to not even do anything, or to continue on the path that they're in, because there's
You know, well, that was the kind of explanation why should the government of the PAN we have too many issues in Mexico, right? So the idea was this. For 70 years, the PRI was dealing with these issues in a good way, in an efficient way, right? So they knew that some people get money, business as usual, and so on, but then suddenly, the PRI was out of the government. And in 2000, what was the name of this very clever guy? Vicente Fox. He got into the office, I should say, right? And since the classical agreement between the PRI leaders, local leaders, and the narco-traffic groups wasn't anymore in place because the PRI people was taken off, new agreements need to be done. And it seems that the people in the PAN, which is the alternative correlation, right, were not very clever in doing this. And then that's exactly what led to the war on narco-traffic and to the killing of more than 200,000 people in the, what was Felipe Calderon government, right? So yeah, the argument is, you know, even though we have a lot of casualties, don't press too much because somehow this is stable. If you change that, many people will pay the cost, right? But the point is, when I said 20,000 people were killed and disappeared last year, right? It's an official numbers, official data. But the question is, how many thousand are being suffering the consequences of this neoliberalization process, right? Because we have the impoverished life, we have the gap in the budget for education, health system. We have many other social issues. It's not just narco-trafficking. We also have the immigration process. So the immigrants coming here are not just because they like hamburgers. They are pushing here. They are being pushed because of the consequence of a global economy. You see? The consequences of global economy express themselves in these big migration processes too. So yeah, it's kind of difficult.
Yeah, that's what I just see it as so embedded that, I mean, the government has to take on, and society in general, Mexico would have to take on a huge risk in order to do that.
Well, it
shouldn't happen, but.
One thing I think that's, to my mind, is crucial is that from the perspective of the criminal organizations, they frankly have no problem taking on the state. They've been doing it for decades now. They either fight them or they co-opt them. And they've demonstrated clearly that at worst they can fight the government to a draw. If social movements, if civil society, if the Mexican people as a collective turn their back and in a major way say, hasta la madre, you know, basta ya, no more of this, the cartels don't stand a chance. They cannot defeat the Mexican people. They can at least fight the Mexican government to a draw. But if there's some sort of massive, huge transformational groundswell, then it's not a fair fight. The people will win. Are we at that point yet? I wouldn't say so.
But I totally agree that the only way out of this is people. There's no messianic leadership. There's no the extraterrestrial life. You know, it's not able to have a time machine and bring it back a should be. It's people. It's people. It's always like that. It's just people, common people, everyday life people. People who fight. People who study. That's it. To me, that's the only solution. And guys, the fact that we speak about this situation in Mexico and we speak about narco-traffic as illegal organization and the influence of narco-traffic in politics shouldn't include the fact that we also confronted something similar in America with the lobbyist companies and corporations. I might say something like that, right? If you can say this on Mexico or Brazil, there is no public position that is not somehow financially supported by the narco-traffic groups. I might say something similar in America. No as strong as this, and please don't recall me on that because I'm still working on my citizenship, but
We call them pharmaceutical companies here.
you might say something.
Not drug
You might say
cartels.
there is no public position of the state and the Congress, and it's not somehow related to money coming out of the corporations. Now, what made the difference between a narco-traffic efficient corporation that put a lot of dope in American market and a pharmaceutical corporation that produce, or a chemical agricultural corporation that produce, you know, this kind of pesticides and stuff like that? So this is the issue we're confronting now. You know, it's no imperialism and the anti-imperialist movement and the classical 1960s, 70s liberation revolution. We are confronting we're in a moment of history in which is the people somehow have this kind of corporative logic. It's corporations. And they are not just national corporations, just national. Have no doubt at all that the corporation policies regarding the detention centers in America are profiting from the people. Just think about that. So yes.
I'm sorry, I just gotta get this out of the chest. To me, it feels like the president is focusing more right now on the economy, like this is a whole controversy going on, but also too of the White House that his wife bought, and now she's trying to sell it. And to me, it feels like he's not putting as much attention to the families of the victims. And like, for example, on Sunday, I saw an interview where they're actually interviewing one of the victims' families. And to me, it feels like the president is not focusing more on them, but I think he's more focusing on the whole issue of the China thing that's going on.
Well, the whole agenda of Peña Nieto is the modernization of Mexican economy, right? The very first discourse was we need to change the American image in the exterior, abroad, right? We need to change that.
And right after this whole issue happened, I saw a tweet where he said, I think it's more important right now to focus more on the economy. He's been saying that for years, and I see the economy is still the same.
It's even worse.
Yes, it's even worse. So why are we supposed to focus right now on the economy when I think what he should focus more is on this, trying to get justice for these people?
He responds to particular corporation interests, isn't it? Here, you heard about the big house of the president's wife? We need a building like that to have a Latin American Studies office. That would be our next claim here.
Let's settle for the maid's office.
Yes, I see.
Is that what, $7 million house?
$7 million.
$7 million house?
It's supposedly owned by a company, right?
No, she got it because of her acting in Televisa.
So, probably she's the best actress in the whole Mexico and the whole world, $7 million.
He also did something, I don't know if you followed this yet, but it was just this morning, I believe, that Peña Nieto made some, from my perspective, politically stupid, if not suicidal remarks, where he essentially equated all protesters with efforts to destabilize Mexico.
Yeah.
So he's demonizing the opposition.
Which is a classical
that is throwing gasoline on the fire.
Yeah, with my student we're studying the pacification of the Pampas in the 19th century and how the state feel free to kill the indigenous, right? And it's exactly the same structure, the demonization of the people who is complaining and protesting. The same strategy in Chile. You remember, you were working on that, right? The student movement and the neoliberal reform. So the student complained against the government because the government is not, fulfilling any kind of promise regarding the education system. So the student get to the street, millions of the students, amazing, creative meetings. They were not just throwing stones, as in my time. Very old time. No, but they were creative, performers. And of course, the media, instead of paying attention to this creativity and to, the proposition coming out of the student movement, pay attention to a few guys that were actually still in the classical strategy, right? So the demonization, indeed, these are very clever, very clever. No, not at all. It's a very crucial sentence by one of the most important women in the Congress. She said, I'm very sorry what happened in Ayotzinapa. I'm very sorry what happened in Guerrero. I'm very sorry for everything. But You know, one night they were complaining against the government and they set fire on the door of the house, of the palace of the government. And then she said, but somehow they have it coming because they cannot do that. This is part of our heritage, our tradition. So this is a moment when things are more important than people. You know, and this discourse of security, right, of private property, right, and this demonization are all together working against democratization processes, always like that. The indigenous communities in Mato Grosso or in Amazon in general are complaining against the hydroelectric companies, right, and are complaining about the government because the government is planting caña, and caña somehow produce a really bad effect on the ground. It desiccates the ground. You cannot use the ground in 25 years. You see what it means? So in order to produce, you know, alternative gas, you kill the land, basically, right? So the communities are protesting against that. The communities of indigenous are protesting against that, not because they are ecological, it's because they live there. And the government is producing the idea of this savage indigenous communities. It's always the same strategy. So,
Now, do you think the president will resign if there's more pressure? Or if people from Mexico actually pressure him more and more and more, that he will resign?
it would be very interesting to see that, but I don't see a fracture in the official politics sector. They are trying to isolate the incident with other news. You know.
Alright, so I'm about to make the U.S. seem like a bad guy, so bear with me a little bit. So you could say the U.S. is one of the drug business's best friends. It's like the number one consumer. So is there any way the U.S. can cut that demand, or would that help at all, or just cause more problems?
I don't know. Civil society pressure.
So if tomorrow everybody stopped putting stuff up their nose and, you know, in their mouths, sure, you know. Well, but no, and this gets back to the fact that the number of folks have mentioned that the cartels, or whatever we're calling them, have diversified a long time ago. They see the end of the mother load of drugs on the horizon, and they prepare. Some of the larger ones earn a majority of their money from non-drug trafficking activities. Human trafficking, selling, like I say, timber, pirating CDs and software, prostitution. They're rational corporations, and they're diversified. And so if tomorrow drug demand stopped in the United States, because that's possible, then one way or another, I think these organizations would find a way to stay in existence. Maybe not as powerful as they are, but they've long since kind of saw that day come. That's why, you know, when you hear the arguments about legalization of marijuana, for one thing, marijuana accounts for a tiny, tiny proportion of their overall profits. And for another, even if you legalize all drugs, they've got their fingers in a lot of other things.
Well, this is related to the strategy of boycott, you know. So it's the same kind of international policy from people who were supporting Palestinian people under the attack of the Israeli government. They proposed this international boycott to Israeli products. And in some places it's actually worked, in some places it didn't, of course. But yes, it's a kind of empowerment of the citizen. It's not the best one though, because it implied that the citizen became just consumers, right? But it's at least something. You decide to not consume any more Mexican rock, and you cultivate your own stuff. Go to work, you're recommended to do that, of course. But it's a kind of resistance, or, you know, that the consumer can produce.
I have a question more for just, so they looked for the 43 and they found more mass graves. What has been the government's response and an explanation for the fact that, oh, we'll find these 43 and then, oh, all of our troubles and all of our...
They found 300 more.
Yeah, so what has been the response to this, like, blunder, I guess you could say, by the government?
there are many discourses. One in the secret, intimate circles of the government is these Indians are killing themselves. The other public discourse is things are as bad in there that it is logical, it's natural. It's naturalization of violence. That's exactly what I was saying, that we need to go against this production of the naturalization of violence, because when you tolerate one killing, you are open to tolerate everything, right? And that's exactly what the media produce. Media produce tolerance, right? So you get used to, right? But there are many, many discourses. I mean, the most important one is, well, we know things are like that. We are working to improve the situation, but we know that people kill each other there, right?
Yeah, like those graves or fosas, they are found in all Mexico, not only in Guerrero, it's in all of the states. And a lot of the arguments is because they say that it's because of the narco, it's just violence between narcos and all of that. So, but it's been more than 100,000 people killed since like 8 years ago. And it's just this argument when happened with the students, I mean, what argument they have left, because they were students, so they couldn't, they tried to, one day I read in the news, they tried to blame them that the students were part of the narco and they were like fabricate these news, these stories, so we can justify, oh, well, they are from the narco, the cartel, so they deserve that. So it's just as I said, like as Sergio said, it's just the manipulation of the media and what people received as, oh, it's okay because they are just violent people. They deserve to die. They deserve to be killed like that. But it's more than that. It's just we don't have a justice system built in Mexico. It's just mainly like this fabrication of the argument when they said that it's very common that in Mexico they torture someone and they made them to be guilty. So these people say, yes, we did it, but we just have their words. There is no investigation behind that. We don't have a justice system built in Mexico. It just, I don't know, crazy.
Yeah, it works like that. I mean, this is exactly the same point. The first 5 years of the 90s, when the femicides were becoming really an issue, right? Already from the late 80s, but in the 90s were pretty bad in Juarez, right? The police seems to very efficient, found many people that were guilty. But then we have organization protesting against the violence against women, and then also organizations that were protesting against the illegal apprehension and the illegal charging that the police does against people. So many people was found guilty of killing the sister, the wife of the friend, or their own wife, just because the torture process, the compulsion of declaring yourself guilty or something, right? So yes, well, just imagine that. Torture is a common practice in police activities. That's supposed to be something that we can discuss. Torture as a common practice. And not even discussing torture as a last resource to find crucial information, which is kind of the discussion we have in America, right? And I totally agree against torture by any means. But I'm discussing about a practice that is regular. Torture as a regular practice. Can you imagine that?
Dr. Ryan, sorry. This is no question, sorry. I might not get a chance to ask again. This is about politics, and I apologize. I don't know nothing about Latin American politics. I don't understand why. Well, I mean, Dr. Guerrero was proving me wrong. I used to think Mexico was all violent because that's all we see in the media. But when he told me about Central America and the train, you don't hear about that. But that's true. I just don't understand it though, because I know that Chapo Guzman that's what I believe. I thought he was the only head of the snake, and when you cut the head of the snake off, it should be over. And it's not just there. I mean, you look at other dictators. I mean, Noriega, Somoza. Even after they got killed, there was still violence. Because I remember back when I used to live in Los Angeles, you know, in the 90s, it was the Arellano brothers. Those were like the most dangerous ones. And now they're nothing. But that's what I wanted to know why I don't get it. I mean, I thought when you kill the dictator or you take him out of power, that's it. It's over. We won. It's fine. Violence is over. I don't get it, though.
If you assassinate the head of GM, is GM going to stop making cars? That's what these things are. They're multinational criminal enterprises that increasingly have, you know, the whole, it's called the decapitation strategy, and that's what was originally employed in the fight against the cartels in the 80s in Colombia. And what they found, in a lot of ways, is it made things worse, because if you cut off the head, then it's not the serpent that dies. It's like that Fantasia, you know, sequence where you cut the head off and it breaks into two, and then you cut those heads off and it breaks into four, and all of a sudden you've got micro cartels, essentially mini organizations that are next to impossible to control. And so, you know, I think a lot of folks in law enforcement and in other areas have long since recognized that it may make nice press, it may, you know, get headlines, it may produce some political capital for, you know, the politicians, but it's not going to resolve the problem.
Same thing with the assassination of Osama bin Laden.
Right.
It didn't stop the war in the Middle East.
Right.
Guys, I just want to sign you. We are on time and somebody will use the room. But please remember to be active, to engage, and remember also that we are people from Latin American studies, professors, always willing to work with you. We have classes that precisely are designed to discuss these issues. Thank you for coming.
Can I just make one last?
One last.
Sorry. I know, just because you brought it up earlier, the Ferguson, Missouri situation. There is a group called Hands Up NWA that started after the incident that happened with Mike Brown and Darren Wilson. In these days, maybe it just happened, I haven't checked my Twitter feed or my messages, but soon the grand jury is going to decide, it's going to release their decision. We're expecting for Darren Wilson to get off with the death of Mike Brown. The day that they release the decision, there's going to be a group meeting at 9 p.m. At the Omni Center for Peace, Justice, and Ecology to prepare for actions for the next day. The day after they release the statement from noon to 2 p.m., there's going to be an action at the corner of College and Dixon, over by where the courthouse is. I can't say very many details about what's going to happen, but you don't want to miss it. And it's another chance to express your voice about what's going on in communities. Why are black men being killed every 28 hours by police, vigilantes, and security guards? And it is an attack on the community, just like immigration's attacking the immigrant community. So we would like to invite everybody to come out to that. I can't give a date, but the day of the statement, 9 p.m. at the Omni Center, and the following day from noon to 2 at Dixon and College.
Excellent.
You can find it on the Arkansas Natural Dreamers page. They're collaborating with it as well. There's a Facebook page. ¿Cómo se llama la página?
Ayotzinapa.
Oh yeah. This one?
Yeah.